Hey everyone, welcome to the Psyched to Practice podcast, your one stop for practical and useful clinical information, masterful insight from experts in the field, and a guide to daily living. I'm your host, Ray Christner, and with me is
Paul Wagner.
And so, Paul, we continue to chat about words and, continue with looking at it with self-talk today.
Yeah. Last week, looking back on some of our earlier episodes, and, it was surprising in some ways how long ago those episodes were, over a year now for some.
Right.
But, the message really kind of being out there of the importance and significance of the words that we use. And, that's no different than the words we use when we talk to ourselves.
Yeah. And I think, we say this, I think somewhere in the beginning of the episode, but, we're with our own self-talk nonstop. It's with us all the time. Whether we're talking to someone else, we do still have dialogue going in our own minds. And so really important for us to kind of attend to. So what was your takeaway today?
It was one of the earlier, examples that we were talking about, how self-talk can really be, once we're aware of it, we can make some specific changes of it. And it was your example of trying versus doing. And, I've heard it before. I've heard it in media. I've heard it in, motivational speaking. But I don't know that it occurred to me to really bring it into the therapy setting and the value of when we're setting these therapeutic goals and, encouraging someone, let's encourage them to encourage them into, this activating action rather than encouraging them to try, because trying leaves too much flexibility in a sense. And, when we're talking about some of these goals, we are really wanting to approach it with a mentality that says, hey, I'm not going to try my best. I'm going to do my best.
Yeah. I think that, I find that is actually important in a lot of the work that I've done with people. And, I use it often in therapy. And, I think for me today was, maybe a much more broad kind of concept. But, I think with all of this, just keeping in mind that we should approach our own self-talk with some intention and some purpose. And, I think it's easy for us to just have this fleeting dialogue through our mind all day and it impact us, and us not really taking time to just really sit with what do we really tell ourselves. And, I think there's such a value in that. And I think that by itself is therapeutic, even if we don't change anything, but just to sit with our own thoughts and say, gosh, what do I say to myself in different situations, and how is that impacting me? I just think it's a good skill and something that can be really helpful for people. So, for me, this was a fun episode, and I hope those who listen, join us on social media. If you have some of your own self-talk you want to share, let us know. We'd love to hear it.
And with that, we hope you enjoy this practice in action episode, the words we say to ourselves.
All right, Paul. So this week we're kind of extending a bunch of episodes that we've done here over, the last year, and really focusing on the idea of words, but today really getting into self-talk.
Yeah, a conversation that, I think we were just kind of in passing throwing around how it comes up in therapy sessions, and really wanting to stop and attend to it because it's such an important part of the therapeutic process. But I don't know that it's calling it self-talk. And I think if we're not labeling it as that, we're maybe missing out on some kind of really key areas that we can, as clinicians, use to help spark and generate change.
Yeah. And what I think is important about self-talk is, it's an intervention, but it's just something we all do. It's this, this dialogue that we all have, it occurs throughout the day. We probably have a number of conversations with ourselves from the time we get up to the time we go to bed. And the content of that can really have an impact on how we're feeling, what we're doing, and just even our own general well-being. We can sometimes get into some really negative talk with ourselves. And so, yeah, I think talking about it from an idea of it's just something we do, but then how do we use that as an intervention to get people in a different direction? I'm looking forward to it.
And, one thing, and I think we've actually mentioned this a few different times, but the point of intervention that I really like to start introducing the concept of self-talk is if we're pulling back on those stages of change, when we're in the contemplation as well as the preparation stage, and I think self-talk plays a role in everything we do, but I think those two areas are when we're really able to activate. And I think if we don't take the time to be attentive to what is the self-talk that, we're either encouraging for our clients or we're challenging with our clients, that it can really, really influence their overall success.
Yeah. So I guess when you think of self-talk, Paul, how do you define it? What's the definition that you work from? So do you have a specific one?
I think for me, when we're talking about I would say our normative self-talk, it's kind of our conscious a bit, where it's just that running dialogue. It's the curious thoughts that we have. It's the frustrating thoughts that we had, and it's the almost the verbalization of those experiences before we're actually verbalizing them externally. It's the internal verbalization, when we become attentive to our self-talk, I think it's almost kind of moving from, borrowing maybe from a different kind of concept, moving into a more process-oriented focus. And so identifying how do my thoughts, and especially the way I'm structuring my thoughts, generate action, generate change, generate, my responses in everyday settings. And if I overthink my self-talk, is that kind of a sign maybe of anxiety? If I don't plan and prepare my self-talk enough, am I then, kind of setting myself up for being surprised about, how things are going to go or responding? So I think being able to identify it both as just a normative piece, but also the intervention, I think, happens in identifying the process of self-talk.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of similar. Yeah, I tell people often it's, I view it as this real fundamental aspect of what our inner dialogue is. And I say fundamental aspect because it's sometimes so simple. And at times, while it's part of our, I think, consciousness, I think sometimes our self-talk's very fleeting and we don't attend enough to it, but it's still there enough that it has an impact. It creates maybe a doubt in us or whatever it might be. So we really got to think of it from this really basic aspect and look at how it influences, whether it's our thoughts, whether it's our emotions, our actions, whatever it might be. And then moving that, I think, to trying to make sure that our self-talk remains constructive. And I think that's the ultimate goal. And that doesn't, I don't think it's the same as telling people, oh, you gotta just tell yourself good things. There has to be a reality to it, but the words that we use for ourselves are just as important as the words we use for other people. And, I think the more we attend to that, the more intentional we can use that kind of dialogue to move us in a direction that we want. So, I don't think we could spend enough time on how important I think self-talk is in a lot of ways.
And going back into making it a reality base, something I find myself really discussing and talking about a lot is trying to spark curiosity. And I think curiosity is self-talk. And when we can really try to challenge our thoughts and opening them up to, I wonder why, or, what would happen if that's the realistic mentality that I really try to spark, because so often when I'm working with clients, we have a very linear and rigid self-talk. This is how it's going to be. This is the only outcome. This is how it has, like, and trying to challenge and break away from those, like that rigid self-talk pattern, and allowing for this flexibility. Probably one of the ones that I focus on the most is the difference between the use of the word but and. I was talking with a client about how but is the great undoer of everything that comes before it. And, it's true. It's like, oh, hey, that's a really great idea. Right. But, and what I'm saying is, like, I don't think your idea is great. My idea is better. Versus I think that's a great idea. And it's allowing for that collaborative, okay, this is a great idea. And this might also be a great idea. And it allows for there to be this more fluid response. And it kind of makes it more of a scale rather than an all or nothing.
Yeah, and I like that. I like the idea of viewing it that way. And I think that's a great way when we're initially dealing with people that have negative thought patterns. And I think we can use that even though to be more of an intervention, in the sense that, I oftentimes will get people where, you talk about it as the great undoer, that we can put our butt into things and make it work better. Where if we say, I'm really not prepared for this test, but I might get a good grade. We could use that same self-talk to really switch it. But our patterns aren't usually that, though. We typically take but in a negative direction. And so, I think that part of self-talk and using it as an intervention is getting people to realize, when do they use it for defeat and when do they use it for success? And it's sometimes just really minor changes.
And something you brought up even as we were prepping, Ray, and it hits close to home too, because it's a conversation my wife and I had where in certain conversations, I will use the word but as, in a response. And that's a verbalize, that's not self-talk, right. But even in the way that I'm thinking about, it's like, oh no, like I'm a techie. Like I like staying up to date with technology. And, one of the first interactions I had with my wife back before, like when we were just first starting to talk, we were talking about like internet providers and, what high speed they give. And I really thought I knew my stuff. And I was like, oh, like, yeah, but, and then like, she called me out on it. And, she continues to this day to, call me out on certain times with it, but how I wasn't attending to that, to truly what she was saying. And I was dismissing it before really sitting with it. And you brought up that the value of it in conflict resolution as well. And that's an area where I think it's really, it's indispensable to try to promote this flexible understanding of perspective taking. And, the self-talk we use either promotes perspective taking or it challenges perspective taking. And, in a relationship, having some good perspective taking really helps.
Right. I mean, I think, again, we all have self-talk while we're having conversation with other people. And attending to that's really important. I mean, I think in the moment, like what your wife called out, your butt came because you were trying to come up with a response without really listening completely to what she said. And we all do that. I mean, I'm guilty. I think probably most people would be. So yeah, I think kind of that's a time where trying to turn off our self-talk for a moment and not trying to come up with a response is good. Yeah, I think with relationships though, or interactions, the other thing I think is important is we can use our self-talk in preparation for those interactions with other people. And, again, we all talk to ourselves all the time in many times a good way, but, rehearsing conversations and using our ability to self-talk before we get into a conversation can sometimes have a much more positive outcome. So we can also use self-talk as a rehearsal and to hear ourselves and to hear how we might respond.
And, I'm thinking back to like high school or college, or I don't know that I had a graduate level speech class, but at least, in undergrad where it was a lot of it practicing and rehearsing. And it was, how do we frame out, the way that we're wanting to share information. And I also think that looking at patterns of self-talk where if we over prepare, how that can at times be stifling. And I know that when, in my undergraduate speech class, when I had verbatim my script written out, I fumbled through it because it wasn't, once I deviated, then it started to all crumble and fall apart. And I didn't have the confidence of giving myself the flexibility that, okay, I know this, I'm looking for keywords, or I'm looking for this concept. And so at times I do think our self-talk can do the same thing where we have such a, we rehearse and we rehearse and we rehearse. We have this expectation of how it's going to go. And when it starts to deviate, our self-talk is so rigid that it doesn't give us the flexibility to adapt and recover.
Yeah. Right. And then in that moment, we get into negative self-talk that pushes us into a whole other direction.
This self-talk thing is everywhere.
It is. It's kind of interesting, So you brought up the and but. I think maybe kind of keeping with that. One of the ones I like bringing up to people is self-talk using words like try and do. It's especially when we're doing work with maybe athletes or even executives who are looking at ways to up their game. But I even think just for I think anybody who's maybe looking at trying to set new goals or achieve new achievements, trying and doing makes a difference. So, paying attention to saying, tomorrow I'm going to try to get up and exercise versus saying, tomorrow I'm going to get up and exercise. Like those two self-talks are very different and results in, if we use the word try, it gives us a way out. And many times we'll take it. I always use the example, my youngest daughter is now in college, and I wish I could go to the university and say, I'm going to try to pay your tuition. But that's probably not something the college is going to let fly. They want me to come and pay their tuition. And so I think we got to treat our own kind of goals the same way. Like if there's something we're going to do, telling ourselves and rehearsing that, I think, again, good self-talk. We don't get credit for trying, we get credit for doing. And that's, kind of keeping that thought pattern.
Especially in that area, that's where, this like motivational mindset, and it's fairly pervasive in pop culture. But again, I don't know that we're really stopping and labeling it as that fundamental of self-talk. I think we're missing an opportunity of making it approachable because it's like, oh yeah, no, like if I can change the way I think I can change the way I act, I can change what I do. But if we can really label it as already doing the action, we just have, we have to do it in a different way. And so if we can label it as self-talk because it's something that's it's constant, it just draws more awareness to it. And I think it lets us be more effective. And certainly in the therapy setting, I think it's a great asset to pull on and, to goal set or to conflict resolve in many different settings.
Yeah. And, I want to jump back to you. You're about this, kind of just what you had said was, I think we do get into this trap with patients that don't realize the impact that their self-talk has, that they dismiss it. And they're like, oh, if I say I'm going to try, that's good enough. It's not. Like it does make a difference in what you're going to do. And I oftentimes will tell people, like, we have to almost have a warrior mentality. Like, think about somebody going into a battle who says, I'm going to try to do my best going in here. Probably not the person I want to be next to that's going into that fight. It's I want the person that's like, I'm going in and I'm going to kick ass. I'm going to do whatever. And I think that it's so important because I don't know that we've gotten away from that societally, but I think that sometimes we accept when people don't use stronger statements. And I think it's so important, and it doesn't mean you have to be an athlete or an executive, but if you're a student, don't go in and say, hey, I'm going to try to get good grades. I'm going to get good grades. And when you do, then it sets you in an action to achieve that. If you want to go on a diet, you want to exercise, you want to do whatever, getting yourself into that mindset. I don't think we give enough credit to how valuable it is. And yeah, I know there's like a lot of motivational speakers out there that do it, but there's a lot more to it than meets the eye. And I even find with myself, like if I at night go, I'm going to try to get up early tomorrow because I want to run a few errands. That is just me saying I'm not going to get up early and I'm probably going to run late all day. But if I say I am getting up at 4:30 in the morning and I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, I do it. And so I don't know. I as simple as this is, I think it's just something we really need to promote more and more with people in general, and definitely in therapy sessions. I know with people I work with, I don't want to say I hold them accountable for their language. That's maybe too strong of a statement, but I do try to call them out on that. And I say, we have to let's use language that's going to get you to do what we need to over the next week. So, I think it's just an important piece to all this.
And I think not necessarily in that same way, but working maybe towards a similar goal of like whether it's awareness or sparking change. The self-talk between the language of needing something, wanting something, and what we should be doing. And the way that I really like to use that is, let's talk about truly like what each of these mean. And so if I'm like, I need this, I need this in my life, I need to do this to be successful. In some ways we're making it contingent because a need has a high consequence if it's not met. And so like, I need this to be happy. Okay. So what you're saying is your happiness is on the line. And is that really what you mean? Is that truly that intention there? Or is it, do you want this to be happy? Well, we can be happy in other ways. Or someone who maybe is really driven by like an external focus. So, my parents think I should be doing this. My partner thinks I should be doing this. Work thinks I should be doing this. My friends think I should be doing this. And, we're then kind of shifting away like our own responsibility in terms of like pursuing things that are valuable and important to us. And then it's like, I'm doing everything I should be doing. Why am I not happy? We're not doing what we want to do. So being able to almost like look at how do we prioritize these things? And it's one of the times where I do try to be mindful. I think even ever since our Michael Alsey episode of the difference between balance and harmony. But I think, the recognizing the harmony that comes with like, accurate use of the word needs, accurate use of the words like what we're wanting, and accurate use of the words should. And I guess I should stop and label out like that. Like with want, I really try to promote that as that internal drive and desire, and a should is the external opinions of others, and whether they're close with us or further away. The wants can be more instant gratification or more delayed gratification, but being able to frame it out, because there's been clients where we'll sit in and they're talking about like, I should do this, I should do this, I should do this, I should do this. I'm like, okay, well, like, where's it coming from that it's saying they should? And like they pause in their tracks, like, I don't know. Okay, so we're just kind of we're assigning this of like a should, but if it doesn't really come from meaning, then like, well, why should we? And we're not kind of questioning it. But if that's that internal conversation and on that internal dialogue that's there, are we going through an action that we don't really know where it's coming from, or, it feels a bit aloof. So again, this accurate identification, I think, is really valuable and important.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's interesting when you were talking, it got me like, these things make my head go into these like kind of maps of all these different connections. But you're talking about wants and needs, and I just saw this interview with Arthur Brooks, who's a psychologist, and just did a book, co-wrote a book with Oprah Winfrey, and the book's actually about happiness, but in the book he uses this phrase about envy, and he says envy is the killer of happiness. I thought it was just a great phrase, and I just used this with somebody in therapy, which is, I'll get to my point. And they kept saying, like, I need these things. I need to be popular. I need to, get all these likes on social media. That self-talk of need and want led them to this envy that led to this just cyclical depression with this young person who is an adolescent, but it got to a point of just dangerous levels. And at the end of it, we're in session. This isn't about what medications are working or not. It was about the fact that their language got such to a point of, I need this, and if I don't have this, my life's it's over. It's I need to be the most popular. I need to have whatever fashion is, whatever it might be. And it became such a part of this individual's life that it led to the actual emotion of envy. And so she and I had this conversation, and I said, do you know what envious means, and how your self-talk has led you to envy all of these other people, and what's it done to you? Like, how's that? What has happened? And it was such an incredible conversation. And then it led me back to this Arthur Brooks quote that was, envy is the killer of happiness. And so again, how's this all this self-talk lead somewhere? Well, it can lead us to a really negative path if we don't watch it. And, versus, saying, man, I'd really love to have 1,000 likes on my social media. Okay, like that's a real different statement than I need to have it, and how those wants and needs lead to ideas of envy and things. I think it's kind of an interesting kind of way it maps together.
And to maybe actually explore that counterpoint of when we're not activating enough. My thought goes, I was having a conversation with someone, and it's a young adult with ADHD. And I think the phrase that they used were, I should really pay my taxes. And this was in May. And so like, we were talking about like, okay,
is that an option?
And I was like, you should. I was like, what? There's a consequence here. And like, when we're talking about shoulds, right. Like, yes, there's maybe a social consequence or like a pressured consequence. The IRS, coming back to the trying or doing, the IRS doesn't want you to try to pay your tax. The IRS wants you to pay your taxes, and so the fact that we're under prioritizing or we're kind of misappropriating the significance of these certain aspects of our life. So whether it's we're over focusing on something and labeling it as a need when it truly isn't,
right,
or we're missing out on some of the things that really are needs, and that we're downplaying the significance and the consequences that these things are going to have. And so, hey, when you get dinged by the IRS and have to pay that late fee, and then what's the snowball effect here? And so, trying to change even some of that language and being more attentive and aware with it.
Yeah, I think that's the key to all of this. Self-talk's a great thing. We just have to watch the extremes of it and really, you called out Mike Alsey. I'll go with that again. And, we need to create harmony with our self-talk. I mean, I think that's, a key, because it's really the extremes that set us into negative paths in some way. And, I think that it's important. And, there's been a lot written about self-talk. I mean, in our preparation, for this, I was just kind of looking up some things. I'm like, gosh, there's been numerous self-help books about it. I mean, it's been written about since, I didn't go too far back, but at least in the late 50s and 60s, people were talking about self-talk, not only as a therapeutic tool, but, something that we needed to pay attention to. So, yeah, I think it's just important for us to be self-aware of our self-talk.
And, I think as clinicians, if we can either model that self-awareness or, help, bringing awareness to our clients to then have that self-aware self-talk, it lets us be more successful and more successful with the intentions that we set out with.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that's, we can model that really well and, even give people examples, our own personal examples. I oftentimes, I think of, even just disclosure in therapy, but, telling people like, I had somebody who I saw the other 2 or 3 weeks ago, and it was a really complex case. And I had said to them, gosh, I had my own kind of talk about prepping for this session had me going in a really wrong direction. And, I had to pause myself and we had to kind of reset. But again, got myself overthinking it going into it. And the person, just kind of laughed and went, oh my gosh, like I do this all the time. I think we can use that in a really positive way.
And calling out those patterns, maybe some of the gift and the curse of self-talk is because it's so prevalent. It's really easy to, just kind of let it be a passive thing that we're not attentive to. Mm-hmm. And, there are multiple clients that are almost a verbatim conversation of my ADHD medication is what's making me good. And so, just that focus on the word stuff like that, it makes me good. And that's the language they use for themselves. And, I really try to challenge them and, replacing that word good with successful. Your ADHD medication makes you more successful. And, how does it do it? It lets you be more intentional, like borrowing from a different guest that we had, Ari Tuckman, and so many of his trainings, turning intention into action. And so being able to bring that awareness to it. But if we're just using the word good, it then becomes this judgment, almost this values-based judgment on who we are as a person. And, I'm only good because of the medication. No, you're more successful with the medication. It doesn't change how good or bad you are. You can be bad. You can be bad with medication like that. That doesn't take it away. Right.
Right. Yeah. And good or bad is always, it's just the words we should avoid anyhow. So it's, it's just, I think in therapy, there's a lot of ways we can use this. I think maybe our starting point in therapy is just helping people be self-aware. And just be aware of your self-talk. I mean, that sometimes is the intervention itself is just, hey, listen to yourself. What do you tell yourself before you go into school? And, if you're telling yourself, I'm going to fail and I'm going to have a bad day and, people are going to make fun of me, you're anxious before you walk in the door. And that doesn't mean that those things are or are not going to happen. We don't know that, but paying attention to it. And that doesn't mean you have to self-talk yourselves into roses and rainbows. You don't have to sit there and go, my day's going to be wonderful. It's going to be, but to realistically say, I'm going into school and I might have some challenges, but I think I have the resources to be successful. It's a real different self-talk, or I at least know what I'm going to do, or I'm going in to have the best day that I can possibly have. And who knows what that's going to be? We can't predict it. And so I think just that awareness, number one. And then I think the second part for me would be talking with people, how do we change it? So being aware of it, and then how do we modify our self-talk in a successful way? I think those are the two kind of first steps for me. What about you with patients? Do you similar process or?
So the point that I almost always like to start off with is psychoeducation about what's going on. So like, and it's just trying to like, how do we make sense of what's happening here? And it's self-reflection, which is kind of us going back and analyzing, in part, like, how did we get here? The self-talk. What are the driving pieces here? And if we can start to identify those, and my clients are probably sick of me saying, so what would a curious mindset look like instead of this, this rigid mindset? Or, I model it quite often. Like, hey, I'm curious, like, what if we look at it in this way? Or what if we phrase it in this way? Just how many paths that opens up, and recognizing that, even if it doesn't go well, that's not failure. Failure, we can deem it as failure, but failure happens when we stop trying and we stop learning. And when we're just kind of, it's okay, I'm done, I'm giving up. Like, okay, that is when we're failing. But if we're trying and we're reaching a dead end, cool. Now I know, I'm curious what that other turn was. And, that it helps us define and how we talk about success and failure plays such a big role. So I think just trying to be open and acknowledging linear self-talk versus flexible self-talk is definitely an intervention, coupling that with like the psychoeducation piece of, let's look at the patterns that are here.
Mm-hmm. I think another point I think we should make with people is, it's funny sometimes when we talk in therapy sessions about self-talk, sometimes we have people who, they'll say, gosh, when I talk with you about these things, it seems so kind of crystal clear. And I oftentimes will tell them a lot of times I don't even say anything. Like I sit there and I'll I might ask something prompting about their self-talk, and they talk themselves through the whole situation. And one of the things I often will tell people is, you sometimes have to say these things out loud. Like we're self-talk and thoughts are a very similar concept, but self-talk is going to have a much more a dialogue to it. And if we're building this awareness, or we're trying to get people to really use it effectively, they have to hear themselves say it. And I think that's sometimes what therapy does, is it brings those thoughts into a dialogue that they can hear. And then when they hear themselves, they go, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm doing this. I'm talking myself right into the problem that I'm having. I wish I could step back and go, wow, this is all me. I'm doing these great things. But, and not to minimize that we do, I think, great things, but sometimes just really letting them say it out loud is really what helps. So, I think working with people, telling them, listen, while you're driving in your car, talk to yourself. No one knows if you're singing to the radio or if you have a wireless phone set anymore. Just go in and just, say what's on your mind, hear it. What does it really sound like? And then start evaluating that self-talk a little bit. For kids, I'll tell them to do it in their bedroom, or I've had kids do creative, things. I shouldn't say I do. They come up with creative things. They audio record themselves. They've done. I had one guy who would say his things out loud, but he would have an avatar that he could record it, and it would be a cartoon, so he could watch it saying his thoughts back. And I was like, what a great use of technology! So getting people to hear, I think, is an important piece we have to also add into the intervention. Don't always keep it internal, whether it's that we're challenging it or whether we're trying to do it in a motivational way. I mentioned earlier about athletes, oftentimes, we'll say, like, listen, say it out loud, man. If you're really trying to, push yourself, do that out loud. It's going to change your momentum. So we need to do that, I think, with just people in general, getting them to voice it.
And I think one of the most common interventions within therapy, but it's so common because it's so effective, is journaling. And that, you know, instead of speaking it out, it's, you know, let's write out our self-talk and it really forces us, like, especially if it's, you know, pencil and paper, to stop and be intentional just with the action of writing. It's, you know, we're transmitting our self-talk and do this, you know, written expression. So it has us sit with it, but also we can visualize it and we can edit it too. And so there's a variety of ways of going back in and challenging or changing self-talk. You know, if it's verbal, if it's written, but I think the act of, you know, just kind of being with it and, you know, making it more of a prevalent, aware piece of our lives. That's the whole point.
Yeah. And I think getting it out of your mind, and I'm glad you brought up the journaling piece. It's a great way. And I often, when we're using it in kind of the self-talk way and kind of attending to it, you often have people use multiple color pens, you know, write it out in one color and then, you know, edit over it with something else. And what does that look like? How does that change? You know, does that change your intention? Does it change your emotion? Does it make you feel more motivated to take action? Whatever we're trying to achieve with self-talk, it's a really good way to do it. If especially if they enjoy writing, it's a great way to kind of sit with it and modify it. And I haven't tried it using like people typing it out. I don't think I've had anybody do that, but I have had them do the written journals.
I don't know that I've ever encouraged different colors, but I have had individuals that I'll encourage where sloppy handwriting or, you know, even that they're worried that I'll have a physical journal laying around and like, oh, what if someone finds this? And so the value of having it electronically and being able to lock it with a password and those pieces there. So, you know, I think, you know, we're maybe soon coming up here to our time, Ray, but maybe a thought in closing is, you know, if we can take self-talk from an active, you know, taking self-talk from a passive experience to an active one. I mean, that's what we're talking about. Like that's how we generate change. Right. That's how we generate reflection. We make it more active. And so any way we can do that with our client in a way that connects and speaks to them, you know, internally, I think is a good thing.
I agree. And I think my last comment would be, we have to learn to talk to ourselves how we want others to talk to us. That also helps. Because sometimes we can say the worst things to ourselves. So, you know, getting people to really attend to that and treat, you know, use that self-talk in a positive way is a good thing.
Yeah, I think, you know, the audience has probably heard enough of you and I talking to ourselves. So
that's right.
We'll pull back here. You know, we hope you enjoyed this episode. Tune in next week. But until then, be well, stay psyched. The information contained in this podcast and on the Psyched to Practice website is intended for informational and educational purposes only. Nothing in this podcast or on the website is intended to be a substitute for professional, psychological, psychiatric, educational, or medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please note that no professional patient relationship is formed here, and similarly, no supervisory or consultative relationship is formed between the host, guests, and listeners of this podcast. If you need the qualified advice of a mental health professional or practitioner, please contact services in your area. Similarly, if you need supervision on clinical matters, please locate a supervisor with experience to fit your professional needs.